website. You can take the quiz, and if you score 70% or higher, you'll get a certificate showing your participation in the session. These are some of our upcoming events in the next week. And then also make sure to follow us on social media. We're at underneath the username PreMedCC. And then I'm going to introduce our speaker for the day. Give me one moment. So today we have our speaker is Jonathan. Jonathan was born in the state of Michoacan in Mexico. At the age of 1, him and his parents immigrated to the United States, where they settled in Redwood City, California. Jonathan was undocumented for a long period of time until the Obama administration introduced the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals Act, which he was approved for just prior to transferring to UC San Diego. Jonathan graduated with a BS in Human Biology from UC San Diego before applying to medical school. He is currently a student at UC Davis School of Medicine. Jonathan has held various jobs throughout his education, and at times he had to take time off work or off school to work. He is very passionate about working with at-risk youth and motivating people from underprivileged backgrounds to pursue their dreams. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Hi, Madeline. Thanks for the introduction. So yeah, you got the slides up, Juven? Okay, so first of all, good morning, everyone. I just want to make clear none of these pictures are like personal pictures of mine. I just Googled a bunch of images that I thought fit with like what I wanted to share. So with that, I'll get to it. So I'll start off like in a chronological order based off of how I grew up or my upbringing and different path stages I took in my life that led me to the field of medicine and ultimately to medical school. So this image here, this reminds me of like the way I grew up. I grew up with my older brother and my parents in my uncle's car garage for the first few years of my life. We were all undocumented, and I guess that was like one of the few options we had. So I remember like growing up in a very crowded place, and this is just kind of reminiscent of it to me. So yeah, that's like where it all began for me. My furthest memory takes me back to that. You could switch the slide. So a little bit of history, my family history. My father was he grew up in a very like underprivileged, very poor region, like rural region in Michoacan. And he served in the police force for a few years of his life, ultimately like doing some type of like, from what I understand, like bounty hunter type of stuff, like work out for the government. And I think that carried a lot of trauma, a lot of PTSD that he carried with him that really goes unaddressed when you have lack resources, and even I believe like the machismo culture that predominates in a lot of like traditional rural Mexican culture wouldn't allow for him to like admit that or seek help or anything like that. So that piled up, and ultimately it led to his imprisonment. He was incarcerated a couple of times, and that obviously that had consequences within my family dynamic and within myself as well. Like I grew up with a different image than most people, I think, of what it is to have a guardian who's like mentoring you and who's supposed to be your role model, right? For the most part. So if we could move on to the next slide. So this is actually my real elementary school picture here. I found it on Google, It was in Redwood City. This is where I did both elementary and middle school. And the picture on the left, that just kind of reminds me of some of my childhood memories. So my mom worked as a when my dad was, especially when my dad was incarcerated or incarcerated. My mom was a single mother for a while. She worked at a nearby market as a cashier, so finances weren't very like strong or anything. And she used to borrow these grocery carts and take my older brother and I to the park and everything. And so a lot of my like childhood memories come from that. And that's, yeah, this picture just, it's pretty cool for me. Next slide, please. So this is junior high, middle school. Around my neighborhood, there was a lot of gang activity, predominantly like Latino community. And I guess the way I see it, between like all the struggles I had, a lot of the traumas and experiences I lived, it was easy for me to like just gravitate towards that and start seeking community within like my peers in my neighborhood. And a lot of values are also different. At least like where I grew up, and I know a lot of places that have these underserved, more like machista, macho culture and values. Respect is, for example, is earned differently. There's a different, it's really a different culture. And I think for me, that was difficult, I guess, to transition from all that into a more professional setting. Because once you're trying to go through higher academics, you kind of have to cut all that off if you come from that. And that's like another layer that you kind of have to like get past or shed. So anyway, I hung out with this crowd, with a lot of my peers, some cousins and stuff, and I ended up spending a lot of time on the streets and kind of started neglecting school at that point. We could switch slide, please. And so ultimately, I ended up spending some time in juvenile hall myself, due to neglecting school mainly, and some behavioral issues I struggled with as a consequence of growing up, I believe, where I grew up and my upbringing. And this was a very interesting time for me in my life. It was a very introspective and reflective period. This is actually the first time that I ever read a book cover to cover, like from beginning to end in my life. I had never done that before. But here there wasn't many options, right? You're just sitting in a bed like this all day. And I mean, what else do you do? So that's kind of where I really delve into the seeking of knowledge and just enriching my life in that way. Next slide, please. And so I ended up earning my GED. I think it's called the high set now, which is the high school diploma equivalent. So I earned that while I was on probation schools and stuff like that. And I was fortunate enough to realize at that point that I had to make a very serious choice, or a few serious choices. And it was whether I wanted to continue down the path that I was going in, which I knew I was lucky enough to foresee that like the only outcomes, which were really like long-term imprisonment or early death. That's kind of how that life goes. So I decided to cut all that, to take a detour, to turn back and go a different way, to stay out of trouble, for my family's well-being. I had a younger brother who was very influenced by me as well. So all these things helped me to change my direction and find a greater purpose in my life and change course ultimately. And so next slide, please. So after this, I decided to enroll in community college. I wasn't exactly sure what it was. This is actually a picture of my actual community college as well, Kenyatta College in the Bay Area. Um, I wasn't sure what it was that I wanted from school. I just knew that I needed to stay out of trouble and I needed to get myself busy with something. And my initial motive or my initial declared major was economics. I was actually interested in, I saw a lot of problems within my community and within my peers, and like poverty, mental health issues, violence, poor physical health, alcohol, substance abuse, all of it. And for some reason, like at that young age, I believe that the issue, the real issue, the problem was low resources or low level of resources. So I believe that somehow if I was able to accumulate a lot of wealth, I would be able to fix a lot of these problems. So that was my my initially declared major when I was in community college. I had this idea that I just wanted to be super wealthy. And then I took a biology course for the general education requirements, and I mean, I fell in love with the science. I fell in love with life at a cellular level, the molecules, physics, all of it. It's just a whole different universe that I just fell in love with. And I tried athletic training and fitness for a while, but to me, the knowledge just wasn't enough. Like the knowledge and the understanding of human life, of disease, of health, it just wasn't deep, thorough enough down to the molecular level. So I just decided to keep going, keep pursuing more. And so the images on the right, just exploration. This was also a time where I was on and off in community college. I was working different jobs, trying to figure out where I would fit in or what I was interested in, which is something that I would actually encourage for everyone, especially when you're young. Like, just explore, like figure out what it is that you like, what you don't like. I think that's because I feel that the field of medicine is very rigorous. It's very demanding. And I think that knowing not only what you want, but maybe what you know that you don't want out of your career or life is something that it should be very I think it's very important to consider. Anyway, next slide. So I finished on my prereqs, and I transferred to UC San Diego. This is our library here, Geyser Library. I switched my major, I majored in human biology, and this is a Salk Institute, the picture on the top right, which is a research facility in La Jolla, right across the UC San Diego campus. I did a summer internship program here in neuroscience. Yeah, I guess it was just more of my exploration period, trying to figure out what sub interest I had in the medical field or in the science field. It was very interesting. What else did I want to say about this? Yeah, okay. So for this research opportunity, I went for it like myself, I was very what's the word? Determined about it. I was very, very aggressive because a lot of research opportunities, like a lot of other opportunities that are going to help your resume and your career, are very, very limited or very competitive. So you somehow got to stand out, right? So I emailed the Salk Institute initially, and they never responded to me. And I actually walked in. I wouldn't recommend or suggest that everybody do this, but I walked in. I knocked on the door and just walked in the middle of the day when they were like running their work, and they actually mentioned to me that they were a little annoyed by it that it was annoying that I did that in the middle of their workday, but that it stood out and that it showed like I guess just perseverance and other qualities that they hadn't really seen there. So I guess what I'm trying to share with that is you kind of have to stand out. You have to go above and beyond sometimes for things that you might really want or want to pursue, right? So yeah, next slide. So I actually ended up applying to med school twice. I took the MCAT 2 times as well. Sorry, I didn't do as well as I wanted the first time around. And honestly, like I tried the first time around, I tried to do it like more on my own somehow. I got into undergrad without a whole lot of support, I believe, in terms of like having people revise my essays and help me with my application or anything like that. I kind of did it more individually. I took that approach for some reason. But that this is not going to work, and that definitely is medical school is a whole different beast, and you're just going to have to find mentors. I can't stress enough that you need mentors. You need guidance. You need guidance counselors. You need to tap into all these resources, all these programs that are offered. It's ultimately it's just something you cannot do on your own. It takes like a whole village to help you get into med school, from what I've seen. So next slide, please. Actually, can we go back to the last one? Yeah, so the first time I didn't do well. Second time I started looking for more resources, trying to connect. I was introduced to different resources like what's the name? UWorld is a resource I use, which is like a question bank, things like that I didn't know about and I couldn't figure out on my own. So those were things that came with networking. We're trying to find other guidance from people who are more experienced in the field. And I know there's a lot of programs out there and resources like information on postbacks, things like that can only benefit you. And looking back, I wish I had explored more of that and asked for more help from counselors, from medical school admissions counselors as well, and stuff like that, because that makes a huge difference, I think. Yeah, we can move on now. So while I was applying and to strengthen my application, since the first time I felt like maybe I hadn't done enough, and not only that, I also wanted to make sure that this is really what I wanted to do. Like I said, it's a huge commitment. You're gonna invest a lot of your life years into the field before you actually start practicing and everything. So it's something that I think your why has to be very, very clear. Why is it that you want to go to med school? Why do you want to become a doctor? And that's probably one of the most, if not the most, I guess, weighted question in the interview process. They're definitely going to ask you that, and I think that's probably very a very heavy question, a very weighted question. Why do you want to do it, right? So I seek more clinical experience. I volunteered at the Perez clinic, which is in my hometown. I also mentored and tutored youth in Juvenile Hall, and I worked in the mental health field for a couple of years. And all these things ultimately like helped me to understand for myself, mainly that this is really something that I wanted to pursue. And I think that medical schools also are interested in seeing like your passions, your reasons, like in showing, not just talking about it, but being able to demonstrate it. Like, what experience do you have that shows that you really do care about this, or that you really are passionate and willing to work for for this or that, right? So mental health field is something that I'm definitely passionate about. Next slide. So yeah, so this is back to what I was saying, mentors and guidance. So I seek more guidance, more mentors. I ask more other med students above me, how they prepared, things like that. One resource I got, like I mentioned, was the UWorld question bank, which I thought was one of the greatest resources for MCAT prep that I used. Mentorship. I was able to find support and help with the whole application process, because that's also like a full-time seasonal job in itself. It's a lot of work, getting your essays right, your responses, everything. Everything is actually paramount when it comes to the application. So yeah, next slide. So yeah, ultimately I used all that. I used the help. I think my biggest obstacle in the whole process, from the first time applying to the second time, was just seeking that help, that guidance, that support, the mentorship, and it made a difference. Ultimately, I got an interview at UC Davis, and I ended up getting accepted, and on the third block of, is it the third? Yeah, the third block of my first year of medical school now. So yeah, that's what I have for you guys. If there's any questions or anything.
So we have one question, and she's wondering how much time went by before you retook the MCAT?
I think I took it like a year later, but I prepared for it a little bit longer. The first time I took like 2 months. The second time I took 3 months studying for it. And it was, I don't know how other people do it, but for me, it was I lived like a monk for that time period. Like, I wasn't working. I just woke up and just studied like full time every day for like 2.5 months straight. Just questions on question banks. And yeah, that's what I did.
And then we have someone who's wondering, how is your first year of medical school going? And is it what you expected, or are there any surprises?
Yeah, I don't know if I can say it's what I expected. Maybe I can say it's what I expected in terms of workload. It's a lot of work. I think I heard a quote recently, that you should understand that the reward for hard work is more hard work. I don't know if that's true in all the cases, but definitely in this field, like at least in medical school, going from undergrad to med school, you have to be prepared to do a lot of work. But if it's something that you're interested in, that you're really actually passionate about, and you enjoy the science, then that is also huge. Like, I feel very lucky to be here. And even though some blocks have been harder than others, and some material, I'm fascinated by all of it. It's just the amount of work. It's a lot within like a short period of time.
And then we have one question. Somebody is wondering, did you ever get a low grade in undergrad? And if so, how did you deal with it? And did it come up when you're applying to medical school?
I think the lowest grade I ever got was maybe like a B minus. I didn't, in terms of low, I'm guessing low is like a C. Yeah, I don't, maybe I got one in community college, but after that, like, I just ended up raising my GPA. I had a pretty good GPA cumulatively. But I've known people that have had quarters. Some of my friends and classmates had quarters, from what they mentioned and shared. They have quarters where they didn't do as well, but as long as you have this trend showing that you've been doing better throughout the quarters or semesters, it's actually a really good look, because it shows that you're learning from your mistakes. You can adapt and perform better. So yeah.
And one student's wondering, as a DACA recipient, what kind of financial aid were you able to receive?
I'm actually still working on that now. It is a little bit tougher. It's a little bit more challenging, because as a DACA status, you don't qualify for federal loans. I was actually lucky. I got a pretty substantial scholarship from UC Davis. I am also in the middle of figuring out some private loan situations and stuff like that. That's another option, but you will have to find like a co-signer to sign for you. And that at Davis, at least, I think you kind of have to figure that out. But find someone on your own, I think. So yeah, I'm still working on that.
That makes sense. And then somebody's wondering, the AMC, they ask about your personal background, and they have a criminal background question. And did that come up in your interviews? And did you have to enter in anything about your time when you were in juvenile hall when you were younger?
I don't know that I had to enter anything because I was a minor, and I know my record was sealed after 5 years. But I did talk about it. I definitely talked about it because to me it's one of the biggest things that I'm passionate about. It was a big influence in my life, and I'm still passionate about it. And I definitely look forward to continuing to work with at-risk youth and young people that come from these experiences and backgrounds. And that's part of the reason why I decided to go into this field. And I think that when I say your why, or whether it's something that might not be as pretty to some people, like your why is your why, and that has to be very clear, I think, to you first and foremost, and then to the committees or whatever. But I mean, that's my why. I don't know, everybody's is going to be different, but I talked about it.
And we have someone who's wondering, did you have a gap year in between undergrad and medical school? And then if you did, what kept you going during that time?
I think I had a lot of gap years, actually. So the first time I applied, I wasn't lucky, or I don't know if I would call it lucky, but maybe my inability to seek help, my inability to go and ask for help for whatever reason, maybe it has to do with the fact that I grew up kind of doing things on my own, standing on my own for a long time. It's just not very like second nature to me. I tend to want to do things on my own and just handle it by myself. But if I had overcome that, I think, a little bit sooner, and had like seek for help here and there, or find guidance and mentors and programs like these, I would have probably found more resources or opportunities to find clinical experience or stuff like that, because I had to do that on my own. So after undergrad, I actually came back home to the Bay Area, and I did a lot of labor work, like manual labor work. I was working with my dad or some of my uncles, tree service. I wasn't able to find clinical jobs that would help me like strengthen my application or anything like that. So again, like the research experience I got in San Diego, I just had to go knock on doors by myself and find some opportunities. So that's what I did during that meantime, between undergrad and applying to med school.
And how long were you at community college? And do you think that it hurt your application being at community college for a longer period of time?
I was in community college for like a good 5-7 years on and off. I'm a little bit older. I'm 32 years old. So I was in community college on and off Having to work sometimes, take time off from school. I wasn't exactly sure. Like I said, I did a lot of exploration. I wasn't sure. In medical school and this path was probably during that time was probably the last thing on my mind. I would have never imagined that I would have been here at that point in my life. Um, I just maybe it has to do with the fact that I didn't have the exposure to medicine at such a young age. But ultimately, like as I explored, I just found all the science and um, yeah, I just realized this is what I wanted. Um, so the question was, how long was I in community college, right?
Mhm.
And then what was the other part?
They were wondering,
Did it hurt?
Yeah, did it hurt your applications or?
I don't think so. I think there could be an advantage to in terms of the application process to being a little bit older sometimes and having a little bit more life experience in general or in many other different fields. But again, like there is no like cookie cutter, I think, way to prepare your application. I think everybody's going to be different, and I think different schools are looking for different things. And like I said, ultimately, I think you have to your why has to be very clear.
And then somebody was wondering about your research experience and how that was, and what was your biggest takeaway from it?
So I did a lot of bench. It was like more bench research. It was a neuroscience project. We were working with mice. So I was basically killing mice all day, taking their head out of their brain to analyze it. I probably wasn't the biggest fan of it. Um, I didn't publish. I didn't get any publications. I didn't do it long enough. I did a summer internship. But it was a good experience for me to realize maybe that I'm not as interested in bench lab research. But there's other kinds of research. There's clinical research. You can like do like gather like perspective charts, things like that, where you look at patient histories. Like there's all kinds of research opportunities out there that are not just confined to like bench work, working with animals or running experiments in a bench or anything like that. But it was for me, my experience was it was all right.
And then someone's wondering, how many full-length practice exams did you take before you retook the MCAT?
I took a few, maybe like five to seven. I can't remember exactly, but around there. Yeah. So the advice I got before taking it the second time was that you kind of have to torture yourself a little bit with the questions and with the practice exams, and that's what it felt like. To be completely honest, it's like you kind of just have to put yourself through all that work and just understand that the more and more that you just go like work at it, the more you'll develop the skills and the ability to like read through these passages and try to strategize and everything. And build the stamina too. That's also a big part of it.
And somebody's wondering, have you narrowed down a specialty? Are there any specialties that you've seen that definitely aren't for you, or ones that you are interested in?
Well, one thing I've learned is that there are way more specialties than I imagined. There's all kinds of specialties. There's actually a lot of people that go into residency programs, and after they're practicing, realize that there was a lot of specialties they never knew about that they would have like considered if they had known about them. So that's also a lot of information out there that you might be interested in researching or looking into, just so that you don't miss anything. But for me, I'm definitely interested in more like like emergency trauma surgery, maybe, or psychiatry as well. But there's a lot of options, so I'm still exploring with that. But I have shadow trauma surgery, and yeah, that was pretty cool.
And then someone wants to know, as a first-year medical student, do you have time to go to the gym or cook or have a pet? How's your time management right now?
So I think someone shared this with me, and I think I have to agree with it. I feel like in med school, you have time for med school and just like one other hobby, and that's about it. Like just one other thing that you do. So for me, I go to the gym a lot. Like that's all I do. I just study and go to the gym basically. I got into like training like jiu-jitsu and some Muay Thai and weightlifting and all that. So I do that throughout my week with my study. It's like my study break, and then I get back to studying.
It looks like we don't have any. Oh, we have some more questions coming in now. And then somebody's wondering, what is the age of the oldest medical student at UC Davis right now? Do you know?
That I know, there are people past 40 for sure. I don't know exactly what age, but yeah, there's people in their 40s.
I think at UC Davis, the oldest student's 52.
And then I was wondering, when did you decide that you wanted to go into medicine?
When? Okay. So I worked while I was in community college during those years. I lived really close to Stanford University, and I worked at the Stanford dining halls for a while. And I remember like growing up where I grew up in my neighborhood, like Stanford's like always been there. It's like right there, right? And for people like me, like we tend to have this idea that a lot of these kids are like prodigies or something, right? They must be brilliant, this and that. That's just an image that we have, or that I had at least. And then working there, I would like mingle with a lot of them. I get to know a lot of them. I would late night conversations with them, and then I ended up realizing like me and this person, we're not that different. Like this person is not like a super genius, like or a prodigy or anything like that, you know. And a lot of them were also interested in pre-med. They were pre-meds going for med school and stuff like that, and that, like I was already very like passionate about the science, the biology. I had already been exposed to it in community college. I did the athletic training and everything. But after meeting like these peers during that time, that's when I really felt like it was doable. I was like, you know what, like I could do this too. You know, I'm just gonna shoot for that instead. And yeah, that was like when I decided. So it was during my early community college years.
And then somebody's wondering, how was your experience asking for letters of recommendation for medical school applications? And if you have any tips about asking for letters of rec?
Yeah, I think if I'm not mistaken, you need two professors. I think it was 2 science professors. I'm not exactly sure right now, but I think you need 2 science professors and another faculty member or clinical experience. I'm not exactly sure about the requirements. Maybe somebody can double check, but it's the way I did it. Like the approach was just being, I'm pretty like bold, so I would just go like straight to him and just, hey, professor. I asked my organic chemistry professor for one, the research at the Salk Institute where I did research. I asked the PhD student to write one for me, the PI. What else did I have? I think those were both considered science. Yeah, so it doesn't have to necessarily be a professor, but it has to be like a science related experience, I think. Like I said, you guys should double check because I'm not really sure right now. But tips, I think you should definitely go for somebody who you've developed a more personal connection with or a relationship with, somebody who actually knows you a little bit more. Because it really doesn't make sense, and you're not likely to get a letter from, for example, I used San Diego where we had some classes that had hundreds of students, and I never even really got to know the professor personally. Even if I did well in their class, they know nothing about me, so they're not likely to write a letter for you. So you definitely want to build a relationship with the faculty member or the professor, and then I'm sure they will be a lot more willing and likely to write this letter for you.
I will also say that if you're at a community college 2 to 3 years, and if you don't have one letter out of that, considering that the average OChem class is 20 students, you're going to have a much harder time at a class of 300.
Yeah, definitely.
Was your organic chemistry professor that you asked for a letter of rec from, was he at a community college?
Was it she? Yeah, community college.
There was one student that asked this question, and I added some data to it, so I'll post that. What is it like to being an older than most students? I am a 26-year-old pre-med and worry a little bit.
I think 26, 20, at least at Davis, I think that's around average age. I mean the median. Yeah, the average is around 27 or something like that. So I don't think that's older at Davis, but for me, I'm a little bit older than that. For me, sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just coughing, sorry.
Oh, for me, I find that I can focus a lot better. I'm just, it's a lot easier for me to not be distracted now and remain focused, I think. But there are also a fair number of people who have families in medical school, who have children and stuff like that. I mean, I can't imagine that's got to be tough too. But I mean, everybody figures it out, I think, if it's really what you want. And I think everybody's experience is ultimately going to be different when it comes to that.
I would just also add one thing, that according to WMC data, the average first year medical student is 27.6 years of age out of 18,633. In a couple of weeks, we will have a 40-year-old surgical resident at Davis who's going to talk. She started medical school at 37 and got married and had a kid, and she is absolutely fine. So, yeah.
And then we have somebody who was wondering, why did you choose UC San Diego for undergrad? And then building on that, why did you choose UC Davis for medical school?
I chose UC San Diego for undergrad because I just kind of wanted to get away. I wanted to just find something different. I grew up in the Bay Area my whole life. And I loved it. I don't know if any of you are familiar with San Diego, but San Diego is beautiful. There's a lot to do. It's beautiful beaches, weather. It's a really nice place. For Davis for med school, I didn't choose Davis. Davis chose me. So there wasn't a whole lot of options there. I didn't get an interview from UC San Diego for med school. And I think another thing that's advice I was given is you'll find that different programs are looking for different things in their students. Like, for example, Stanford or those top schools, they're probably looking for people who have like heavy experience in research who have like publications and things like that. Some schools are more geared toward like the clinical experience of their students and yeah, so it's different schools are going to look for different things. You might be a strong candidate for one program and weak for another. I've also had I have a friend who went to Harvard Medical School, and he got into Harvard and a bunch of these other Ivy Leagues, but he was denied from other like schools that weren't as research heavy. So schools are looking for different things, and I think again that's why your why should be very clear to you. And one advice someone gave me was, you want to go after things that you care about. You want to pursue things that you're passionate about. You don't want to just try to put all these things, check all these boxes off and present build this resume just to try to fit it into a program, even though you don't like, or you're not passionate or care much about any of those things, because you're probably going to have a hard time. So yeah, that's my answer to that.
Somebody was wondering, how do you manage your time with so many different things going on and being so busy with medical school?
I remember in orientation here, somebody asked that question to some of the MS4s who presented for us. They're like, where do you find the time to do all these things? And the person's response was like, welcome to medical school. I mean, you have to figure it out somehow. It's you kind of like, I think everybody's gonna manage it differently. You have to figure out what your priorities are, what you absolutely must do out of the day, out of the week, and have it all fit in somehow. But it's definitely time management, a lot of it, and organization and all that. So.
And someone wants to know, what is some advice that you'd like to share with us that you wished you knew before entering into medical school?
I think I wish I had known more about the resources for like MCAT prep, for example. It took me a little bit longer to figure out just like how to study for it, what resources to use. And also having overcome that individualistic effort a little bit earlier. That's something I wish I had. I don't wish, I just would suggest that to the younger me. But I feel like things happen for a reason, and I don't rush anything. At the end of the day, this field is also a marathon. Like, you'll realize that soon enough. It's a marathon. There's no rushing here. Like rushing it here, you're not gonna sprint to get there faster. It just takes a very long time. It's a very long career, training in the field. But I would definitely seek more help. That's the advice I would give. Go look for more programs. Go look for more guidance, support. Programs like these, like Mi Mentor, I was told about a little bit later. Just all these different resources to network, to look into other programs, like postbacks, for example, right? A good number of people who did postbacks at UC Davis are in med school at UC Davis now. So maybe seems like there's a benefit to that for sure, and to building the relationships.
Just to kind of piggyback off that, we actually have a presentation coming up in the next couple of days or next couple of weeks about postbacks. If anyone is interested in learning more about that, I'm pulling up the exact date right now.
February 4th.
It's the 4th, yeah, February 4th. We're going to have a presentation about postbacks. And then somebody was wondering, do you have any tips for interviewing for medical school and how that process was for you?
I did the mock interviews. I think there was some resources on for that as well that like offer other med students from all over. They kind of help simulate the interview process, ask you a question, and provide tips for that. I would definitely look for those. I was I attended a couple of them. Yeah, I think there's a lot of detail in that you'll get from that, and that could be a whole different talk. I don't know that I'm very qualified to talk about that. I had one interview, but yeah, I would definitely attend those. If I'm sure they're out there, the mini mock interviews, I think is what they were called, because there's a lot that they share with you, like looking at the camera, making sure you're giving eye contact while you're talking and not looking around, which can be hard through these Zoom things. It's a little bit different. You should also look at those tips for doing the Zoom interviews, because that's what we'll move to now, right? So I had the Zoom interview, and it feels different than an in-person interview for sure, and it might be harder or different to convey like what you're trying to convey, because there's no present body language and stuff like that. So
I don't know, Jonathan. You got one interview and you got one, so you're like batting 1,000 there, buddy.
Yeah. I can't remember at the top of my head. I had somebody help me, a medical student who had served in the admissions committee coached me through the interview process. So I would definitely try to find somebody who understands it a little bit better than myself, and who has some experience in that. That I think that can be very beneficial.
Yeah, Me Mentor does mock interviews, and if you could find them on Instagram, they do a lot of interviews, practice interviews. They also have a medical school ready. So if you're applying that year, they will. But yeah, find them on Instagram, and they post all their stuff there. We post some of their stuff. They have also a mobile app too, I think. But yeah, I just put their Instagram here.
Yeah, I think you definitely do want to get a good amount of practice for the interview, because I think you and I, Juven, we were talking about that a while ago, right? Where it's a lot of pressure and a lot of people who probably don't have that experience of performing and answering questions under that type of pressure. So it's definitely something you want to have some experience in.
I know one medical student, what they did just to deal with the stress, they applied to a bunch of jobs and went to a bunch of interviews, and got really confident in being able to answer questions. And it's a good practice. And, if you don't want the job, it's just a good experience to be in a high stress situation.
And then we have one question. Somebody was wondering, how did you deal with hard classes that are meant to weed out students?
I'm guessing you're talking about like physics maybe, or OChem.
Mm-hmm.
I actually was fascinated by it. So I was, and I don't think I've known some people say you can fool yourself or make yourself believe that this is interest. I actually loved it. Like, I love math. It's always been one of my favorite subjects. So I think when you find an interest in something, it just becomes a lot easier for you to become engaged in it and to want to understand it better. So that was my approach. Or were you asking like whether I went to tutoring or things like that?
They were just wondering about difficult classes, but did you go to tutoring, or did you find any outside resources?
For classes, I'm very like self-driven. I kind of just, I can learn from like a textbook. I don't really need, or I don't think I necessarily need a professor to like explain things to me. I can just read it over and over again. That's how I learn best. Everybody learns differently, you know. Some people are more auditory, more visual, whatever works for you. And that's something that I think is also important to know. If you can't figure that out, I think there's probably also different types of analysis you can do, or like apps, something like that can show you how you learn best. Because if you understand that, then you can be more effective with what you're trying to learn and retain.
Can you tell them what first math class you took at community college?
Sorry, can you repeat that one more time?
What was the math class you started with at community college?
At community college, I started with, I think it might have been algebra, pre-algebra, I'm not sure. I basically, so I dropped out of high school. I don't know, I think I might have missed that. And then I earned my I would spend some time, Juvenile Hall, went to school there. I got my GED. So I basically had to make up for high school in community college. That's probably another reason why it took me so long. So yeah, that's what I started with, around pre-algebra or algebra, if I can remember.
And then do you feel like it's more difficult to study for medical school classes or compared to your undergraduate?
Yeah, there's just a lot more. There's just a lot more to know. People often use the analogy of like drinking water from a fire hydrant. That's what it feels like. It's just a lot of information. And then I think in undergrad, you're learning a lot from textbooks and things like that. In medical school, the field is always changing. There's always new things being understood, things being like that. So you kind of just have to keep up with all of it. So it's a lot more information. But it's also, if it's what you're interested in, it's very fascinating.
And then someone wants to know, what does a typical day in the life of a medical school student look like for you?
Typical day. Well, we have at least here and we had in-person classes 3 times a week before we went back to Zoom learning this at the beginning of this block, which was at the beginning of the month. And we have extended for like another 2 weeks due to like COVID rising again and all that. But before this, when we had the 3 days a week, my typical day, I wake up, have my breakfast, coffee, and then I go to class, where we do, our curriculum just changed as well. So we do a lot of like peer teaching, where we discuss in groups with our peers, team-based learning, where we're presenting like hypothetical cases of patients who come in for whatever symptoms. And so we just go through all that. And then we have a bunch of assigned lectures that are pre-recorded. And that takes a lot of time. And that's like what most of us are doing when we're not present in a class, in a live class. We're just self-learning through these pre-recorded lectures. And there's a bunch of different resources, outside resources, and people pick what works best for them. But so for me, that's what I do. And then I take my gym break. I'll have lunch, whatever, take my gym break, and then go back to studying and prepare for the next day or the next couple of days. And if you want to get involved in other things, like there's student-run clinics here. So that's also another commitment if you're going to pursue that, and you have to prepare for that as well. And yeah, it's just a lot of studying.
And then when did you take the MCAT for the first time? Were you still enrolled in undergrad, or were you had you already graduated?
No, I had already graduated. Yeah, I know a good amount of people who took it while they were in school, but that just wasn't me.
And then, do we have any other questions? It looks like all of the ones have been answered in the Q&A so far, but if anyone else has other questions. We'll give them a moment. I was wondering, what are some of the resources? I know you mentioned that you used UWorld to study for the MCAT. Are you still using that to study for medical school, or are there other resources that you've found that are helpful?
I used the UWorld, the Kaplan, and what was the other one? I think it was directly through the AAMC, right? I think there's like 3 practice exams on there, full length. I think those are very valuable because they resemble more of what the test is going to be like, and you have to. I think you should save those. At least for me, I saved them for the end, like right before, closer to when I was going to take it. And there's a lot of, I think also like watching, maybe you find videos on YouTube on strategies, because a lot of it's also like strategy, like ultimately your goal is to accumulate as many points as possible. So it doesn't matter whether you answered a harder question correctly versus an easier question. The whole goal, the name of the game is just to get the points. So whatever way you can strategize, which for me was like going for the standalone questions first, because they're easier, they're straightforward, there's no passage reference for them. You just knock those out, for example, first, and then you save yourself some time. And then so there's a lot of strategy, and there's videos I'm sure that you can find that can help with all that. So that would be something that I would also look into.
And did you take the new MCAT, or did you take the older version?
I took the new one.
Okay.
And I think during COVID, because of COVID, they shortened it, if I'm not mistaken. But the one I took was the whole full length, like 8 hours.
It's back to the full length now. And then what are do you have any studying tips for being in medical school?
Yeah, like I said, I'm a self-directed learner, so I kind of tend to learn on my own best. But I'm still figuring out. It feels like here, like every block, you have to adjust and adapt differently. Like for microbiology block, last block, we use a lot of people use Anki. I don't know if anybody's familiar with it, but a lot of people here use Anki, and it's like flashcards that you can just pull up, and they just help you keep. It's repetition over time, helps you just maintain all that information, and it worked. I used that for micro, because there was trying to memorize a lot of bacteria, a lot of these microorganisms, and the drugs used to treat them, and it was just basically all memorization for that course. So you kind of have to adapt and adjust depending on what you're studying, I think.
And do you feel like the classes that you took as an undergrad helped you for medical school? Do you feel like there's any kind of crossover, or?
Yeah, definitely. When it comes to understanding systems like renal, stuff like that, um, remembering remembering or vaguely having like some of the physics laws in your mind, like pressure, stuff like that can help you understand how these things work. Um, in terms of like answering questions or passing exams and stuff like that, I don't know if it's too like relevant or if it's gonna help you in that regard. It's- yeah.
And do you feel like the exams that you take at medical school are different than the ones that you saw in undergrad, or what's the testing style like?
It changed from our first block was anatomy, human anatomy. So it was a lot of we had live cadavers and we had to go in and they were tagged. That was the practical exam. And you just had to identify what it was in there, whether it was a spleen or whatever it was. And there was also a written portion, but like last block for micro, we had NBME style, like directly NBME questions, which is like a board stock was for geared for step one, which is like the next standardized exam that you take after the MCAT once you're going through medical school to apply for residencies and all that. So, and from what I understand, our midterms and final this block are also going to be NBME questions. So it seems like everything we're doing here is in preparation for that next standardized test, which I'm sure will be really hard.
And then you mentioned earlier that you worked in the mental health field before applying to medical school. Could you elaborate a little bit more on what you were doing?
Yeah, so I worked as a case manager. I was working alongside there was psychiatrists and nurses, and basically the company I worked for had a contract with the county, and most of the patients, the members that worked that we worked with were under guardianship of the county, so they could no longer, I guess, technically or on paper, care for themselves and like just run their lives on their own in terms of like due to like uh mental health disabilities complications, whether it was like schizophrenia or whatever it was, right? So we, as case manager, we make sure that we develop a relationship with them and that we are involved in their lives, helping them with medication compliance, appointments to hospitals or clinics, and also a lot of them can run their own finances, so there was like to have separate department for that. But basically working with patients under the guardianship of the county who have all types of mental health disabilities that interfere with their daily lives.
And did you talk about your experience working there during your applications and interview?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, it looks like, do we have any other questions?
All righty. Well, thank you. Since there are no more questions, we're going to let everybody go. Thank you again for making